Our friend Chad Samuel has had several great hunts recently here in the Ozark Mountains. You may remember that a few years ago, Grant and I toured Chad's property. It's an 80-acre property about 20 minutes north of the proving grounds. We toured his place and started working with him to develop a habitat and hunting improvement plan. During that tour, it was obvious to Grant and I one thing Chad could easily improve was his food plot process. Deer were browsing his food plots down to the ground, and it was bare, rocky, and it wasn't producing great forage for critters. Chad began implementing parts of the release process to increase the quality forage of the food plots at his property. Chad also began working on the native habitat. He used hack and squirt to terminate some trees, open up the canopy, put some prescribed fire on the ground, all to encourage more sunlight reaching the ground and more growth of native grasses and forbs. Chad's several years into his project, and he's enjoyed many great hunts from his redneck blind. This past summer, I visited Chad's property again to see all his updates, and I was very impressed with the progress he'd made. His food plots were looking great. In fact, he was building soil on top of that rocky soil, some good dark soil, and that was going to equate into better groceries for his deer herd. His native habitat was also coming on strong. Seeing how far the property had come in just a few short years from Grant and I's initial tour to what it was this summer, I was super excited for this fall, knowing that Chad had started building soil and figured his food plots were probably going to be pretty good this fall. During fall planting season, Chad planted green cover seeds fall release blend, and he added a few brassicas in there as well. He hit it perfectly with a timely rain, and by early October, his plots were looking great. Acorn production was fairly low this year here at the proving grounds and at Chad's place, which is only about 20 miles from here. And when those acorns are few, those food plots can really shine. Chad had the limited food source, the best food source in the area, and once you know it, that's where the deer were. As his first hunt of the year was starting to come to an end, there was still a little light. Chad looked over, and once you know it, he saw a nice buck stepping out of the cover. The buck grabbed a few bites of the fall release and drifted back into the timber. As I mentioned, Chad has been working on his native habitat, and that native habitat butts right up next to his food plot. And having food and cover in close proximity, well, deer feel very comfortable moving during daylight hours because they don't have to move very far between food and cover. That design has allowed Chad to experience some great daylight encounters while hunting. A few days later, during the afternoon of October 15th, Chad headed back to his redneck blind, excited to see what would show up. Once Chad was in the blind, he didn't have to wait long. You'll notice the deer were feeding in the plot, head down, hammering the greens, but they were also milling around and going underneath the large oaks on the edge of the plot. These oaks don't have as much competition with their crown, especially on the side of the food plot. They're receiving more sunlight, they can photosynthesize more and produce acorns, better tasting acorns, and they're going to fall right on the edge of the plot. We see this a lot with large oaks on the edge of plots. Deer tend to come underneath and feed there, and it's great because you have both acorns and greens right there in front of the blind. It doesn't get much better than having two preferred food sources within range of the blind. As Chad was watching these young bucks, he spotted a nice set of antlers coming through the native vegetation. It was the same buck he'd seen just a few days before. Suddenly, something caught that buck's attention and he bolted out of frame. Off camera, a doe had snuck up into the plot and that buck had turned and started chasing her. He actually chased her out of the plot and around the point of the ridge. And after a few minutes, he came back into the food plot. He'd certainly chase this doe a little bit, and if you watch closely, you'll see her actually cross the plot and go back into the timber, and you'll notice her tail is slightly tucked. She's probably fairly close to becoming receptive, had a little perfume in the air, got that testosterone going, and that buck had chased her around, but he was back to feeding. But you'll notice he was still paying attention to that doe. As Chad was watching this whole show, deer just kept on coming out into the plot. Slowly, these deer began feeding and working towards the redneck, and the buck brought up the tail. As the buck worked up the edge of the food plot, he turned and went into the timber in the same location that the doe had also entered. Chad patiently waited, hoping that buck was just skirting along the edge of the plot like the doe had done and would come back out into range. Finally, the yearling buck moved and Chad prepared for the shot. The buck hadn't gone far and Chad waited until dark to climb down out of the blind to go get his hands on a beautiful Ozark mountain buck.
Look at all the stuff he's been rubbing on his horns and stuff. A big old body deer. Oh my gosh. Woo! There's a buck.
Congratulations, Chad. Grant and I have really enjoyed being part of the process as you've developed and improved the habitat on your 80 acres. It's not only about harvesting fresh venison or tagging a nice buck, but that whole process, seeing that habitat improve, watching that soil build over the past few years, your native habitat providing more cover and native browse for critters. That entire process has been really fun, and I know that you've enjoyed many great hunts just sitting in your redneck, watching deer, enjoying those hunts, whether you tag a critter or not. That's what it's all about. So congratulations, Chad. Nice work, and we look forward to seeing your next hunt. Whether you're improving habitat or looking for that next hunting location, I hope you slow down this week and enjoy creation. But no matter what, listen to the Creator and the purpose He has for your life. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.